Okay, welcome back, guys. Another video, another review. Let's get started. This is the Bolshevik Revolution. This happened in the middle of World War One. I mentioned it in a previous video. The Russian people were tired of starving and being killed in World War One. So they decided, with the help of a man named Vladimir Lenin, to overthrow the Russian monarchy, which was ruled by a king called the Tsar Nicholas. And so they overthrew the king and killed him and most of his family, and Russia became communist. Okay, the Red Army was the army that overthrew the government. So from here on out, when you ever hear something red, we're talking about something very violent and bloody, or we're talking about communism in Russia. Okay, so this is the start of communism in the middle of World War One. Okay, Russia ended up quitting World War One because of this. Okay, speaking of World War One. After Russia left, America got involved, and America kicked some butt. And within, I think, 9 months, the war was over. Okay, so to end World War One, there was an idea that Wilson had called his 14 points. And as you see on the left side, a lot of good ideas here: open diplomacy, freedom of the seas, creation of an association of nations, preservation of freedoms, all these things. What you also notice is big red X on it, and you know that because what do we do with Wilson's 14 points? Basically, the world said, no, Germany needs to pay. Your plan sucks, Wilson. It doesn't punish Germany enough. They must pay. So these are European nations like France and Britain and other nations that were really devastated by Germany in World War One. So basically, long story short, Wilson negotiated back and forth, and what happened was they agreed to use 1 point in his 14 points. That was the 14th point, where they would create an organization which only goal was to prevent future wars, called the League of Nations. The only problem with this was, this sounds great, but this organization was doomed to fail because there weren't very many strong countries, and there was no army to enforce its policies. For example, it's Woodrow Wilson's idea. Okay, United States wouldn't even join the League of Nations. Okay, Russia wasn't involved. Germany wasn't even invited. France and Britain were in it, but they were so weak because of the war, they had no power. Plus, they were supposed to prevent wars with this League of Nations, but it's kind of like I say, hey, stop that, and you're like, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, nothing. This is what the League of Nations was. Hey, Germany, stop being aggressive. Germany says, well, what are you going to do, League of Nations? Can't really do much. And so basically, one of the big reasons that Hitler is going to take over in World War II is because there is no strong organization to stop him, League of Nations. Plus, America wants to stay out of another war. So round one was World War II. It should have ended the right way with Wilson's 14 points. If we'd have done that, it would have worked. But instead, we went with the Treaty of Versailles, which punished Germany for starting World War I. Okay, and again, remember, Germany could not have tanks, airplanes. They had to pay something like $50 billion in reparations, and this is going to really anger a lot of Germans, and it's going to cause a lot of problems later on, especially when Hitler comes to power and promises the German people, we're going to come back from this. The Treaty of Versailles was horrible, and now they're going to pay for punishing us. Okay, Roaring Twenties was a time of African American art, literature, music. We had jazz music, we had authors, we had poets, we had actual artists who painted and drew. Pretty amazing time. Also in the 1920s, we had this idea of consumerism. Things were really good after World War One. Soldiers came home and they had money and they wanted to buy stuff. So they bought lots of new inventions, like the automobile became affordable. The phonograph was one of the new inventions where you could listen to basically records. Vacuum cleaners, washing machines, stuff like that. Even the radio was a huge new invention after World War One that people would sit around in their houses and listen to. So the Roaring Twenties was a pretty good time for most Americans. The motion picture was out. We had new movies like The Jazz Singer, Steamboat Willie, things like that. You would go to movies and watch them. Americans said, all these new inventions, we need more money, so they began buying things on credit, basically like our credit card. You don't have it now, so make small payments. And this led to a serious problem when many Americans made huge purchases that they normally wouldn't buy. And especially because the economy was booming and the stock market was going nuts. It was doing great because of all these new inventions. Well, people went to the banks to borrow money, and they wanted to borrow money to go invest in the stock market. And the bank was like, hey, you don't even have to give me a lot of money to give you this loan. If you've got bad credit, I'll give you the loan. And this was called buying on the margin, where you would put just a little bit down, like a down payment, and you could go invest in the stock market. It's a huge, huge risk. If you make money, great. But the potential for losing money is huge. And what goes up must come down, and people didn't understand that in the 20s. Things were going so great. And then in 1929, when the stock market crashed, everything just came falling down so hard. Okay. Something else that happened in the 1920s was something called the Scopes trial, or the monkey trial. This was a trial for a science teacher to teach the theory of evolution. And it basically showed that there were two groups in America. There were the religious fundamentalists who believed that you shouldn't teach about man coming from monkeys in a classroom. You should teach about Adam and Eve. And then you had, of course, the scientists who said, look, Charles Darwin has proven that we're very closely related to chimpanzees, and chimpanzees are closer related to such and such. And so scientifically, you should be able to teach this theory. It's just a theory. It's not a fact. Okay. So they went to trial. A guy named William Jennings Bryan came up again to try to defend the religious people, and he lost. So obviously now this is a big deal because you can learn about evolution in schools, and you probably did in your biology class. So another interesting event that happened in the 20s. Okay. All right. Taking a break. This was a 7-minute video on the Roaring 20s and imperialism. We're going to talk about the Great Depression next.